the sound of the distant, mournful wail of bagpipes, a single, lingering note that trembles in the Highland wind before dissolving into mist. The clatter of carriage wheels emerges next, uneven, stubborn, and clearly offended by the state of the ancient road. Wind curls around the carriage, soft at first, then rising in a low, restless howl. The carriage swayed, groaned, and rattled its way across the desolate, magnificent sweep of the Scottish Highlands, as if determined to reach its destination purely out of spite. Lady Isobel MacLeod, despite the chill creeping through the carriage's questionably thin walls, pressed her nose to the grimy window like a child spying forbidden wonders. Mist clung to the craggy peaks in thick, spectral folds, swallowing the last scraps of daylight. The world outside had been reduced to bruised purples and charcoal greys, a palette Isobel found both ominous and artistically thrilling. Another bend, another shroud of mist. Ardnoch. Even thinking the name sent a small, traitorous shiver down her spine. In Edinburgh, the word Ardnoch was usually delivered in a whisper, followed by a theatrical shudder and a knowing sneer. A place where the light forgets to shine, the gossips would cluck, as though darkness itself paid rent there. And of course, they always mentioned her Aunt Morag, the family's most beloved eccentric and the only woman capable of turning exile into a lifestyle choice. But to Isobel, painter, rebel, connoisseur of shadows, such a place was irresistible. A faint smile tugged at her lips as she recalled Morag's final letter. It had arrived just weeks before the telegram announcing her death, a chaotic, ink-blotted masterpiece written on lavender-scented paper. In it, Morag had launched a scathing review of the local vicar's sermon, calling him a dullard whose preaching was as inspiring as a week-old haggis. Then came the postscript, pure Morag. My dear Isobel, one must cultivate a palate for more than piety, or one risks spiritual scurvy. This dragon's breath claret I've discovered, an ancient vintage, likely blessed by fairies and potent enough to raise the dead, reveals more truths than any sermon. Though some truths are best swallowed quickly, preferably with humor and a digestive biscuit. The castle hums with them. Come quickly, for the hum grows louder. Isobel had laughed aloud at the time. Now, the memory tightened her chest with longing. The carriage gave a final, dramatic lurch, as if relieved to be done with its duties, and burst through the last veil of mist. Ardnoch Castle materialized. It did not sit upon the cliff. It brooded there. A monolithic silhouette carved from shadow and stormlight, part medieval fortress, part decaying Jacobean manor, and entirely too aware of its own grandeur. Crooked chimneys clawed at the sky like witches' fingers. A tattered flag flapped from a lonely turret, defiant against the wind. Below, the loch churned in slate-grey fury, swallowing what little light dared approach. A shiver traced Isobel's spine. Not entirely from the cold. She stepped down onto damp, uneven cobblestones, her heavy artist's satchel thumping against her hip. The air smelled of peat, rain, and secrets. As she lifted her gaze to the castle's looming facade, a figure emerged from the archway, not walking so much as materializing from the shadows. Tall, broad-shouldered, cloaked in dark wool that seemed to drink in the fading light. Lord Alastair Fraser. His presence hit her like a sudden gust of winter air, sharp, bracing, and entirely uninterested in her comfort. His storm-grey eyes swept over her with the efficiency of a man accustomed to assessing threats, livestock, and paperwork in the same breath. Yet his gaze lingered a fraction too long on her face, betraying the smallest crack in his stoic armor. You are Lady MacLeod. Alastair's voice was low, gravelly, with a crisp Highland burr. I presume your purpose here is purely administrative. The word purely was drawn out, laced with a skepticism that could curdle milk. The tone suggested he hoped she'd sign the necessary documents, avoid touching anything, and leave before the kettle boiled. Perhaps, Isobel mused, before he had to endure a single minute of her presence. Isobel straightened, lifting her chin with quiet defiance. And you, I presume, are the laird. Lord Alastair Fraser, if the local whispers are to be believed. She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the desolate, imposing structure behind him. Though I must say, the estate descriptions failed to mention the prevailing atmosphere of existential dread with a side of dampness. Alastair's jaw tightened, which seemed to be his preferred method of emotional expression. Hardly a selling point for the brochure, Lady MacLeod. His eyes narrowed slightly, a hint of something unreadable flickering in their depths. Ardnoch serves its purpose without needing to entertain frivolous notions. Frivolous? Isobel echoed, a faint, amused smile playing on her lips. My dear Lord Fraser, Aunt Morag's entire existence was a refutation of the frivolous. And yet, she was endlessly entertaining. I'm here to settle her affairs. And perhaps, she added, her gaze meeting his, steady, unflinching, to understand them. And her. Something flickered across his face. Annoyance. Surprise. A grudging respect. Hard to tell. His jaw tightened again, this time with a visible clench. As you wish. The solicitor is expecting you in the morning. He offered no further pleasantries, no offer of assistance with her satchel that now felt impossibly heavy. Without another word, he turned and gestured toward the castle's interior. The gesture was curt, but not ungracious, the social equivalent of a door held open by someone who deeply regrets the gesture. He didn't wait for her to follow, merely melting back into the shadows from which he had emerged. Isobel sighed, a small puff of steam in the cold air. Well, she muttered to the wind, that was as warm a welcome as a Highland winter. And just as predictable. The sound of heavy footsteps echoing down a stone corridor. The massive door creaks open, then slams shut behind her with a resonant, almost gleeful finality, as though the castle itself has decided she is not leaving anytime soon. Isobel found herself alone, or rather, alone in the way one is alone inside a cathedral of ghosts. Ardnoch Castle breathed around her. Its stones seemed to exhale centuries of secrets, each corridor humming with a faint, restless energy. She eventually located her aunt's chambers, tucked away in what the castle optimistically considered its sunnier wing. The room was drafty, yes, but it was also unmistakably Morag, a riotous, joyful chaos that made Isobel's heart twist with affection. Dried herbs dangled from the rafters like upside-down bouquets. Their earthy scent mingled with old parchment, forgotten perfumes, and something faintly metallic, the aroma of magic, or mischief, or both. Arcane books lay open on every available surface, their brittle pages frozen mid-incantation. Half-finished canvases leaned against the walls, depicting fantastical beasts, Highland fairies, and landscapes so wild they seemed to howl. On the mantelpiece stood a regiment of dusty, unusually shaped wine bottles, each one a testament to Morag's lifelong commitment to questionable vintages and excellent stories. On a cluttered desk, beneath a wilting bunch of thistles, lay an ornate leather-bound journal. Its delicate silver lock had been broken open, not gently, but with the determination of someone who either lacked patience or feared what lay inside. Beside it sat a single uncorked bottle of dark red wine, its label faded beyond recognition, but the rich, earthy aroma rising from it left no doubt. Dragon's breath. Isobel lifted the journal, her fingers tracing the worn leather. It fell open easily, as though eager to speak. Aunt Morag's warm, witty, a touch macabre, with a lilting Scottish cadence voice echoed in Isobel's mind as she read, Day 147 at Ardnoch. The whispers in the walls are particularly lively tonight, like a congregation of gossiping banshees. I poured myself a glass of dragon's breath and, out of courtesy, offered a silent toast to the ghost of Lady Evelyn. We toasted to defiance. This particular vintage, Isobel, seems to possess a remarkable talent for loosening both spirits and secrets. Pity the current laird seems perpetually tightened. This castle Isobel is not merely a collection of stones. It is a living creature, a hungry beast that feeds on the unsaid and the undone, especially matters of the heart. And its laird, poor Alistair Fraser, he is its willing prisoner. Shackled by shadows he believes are his alone to bear. He lives in fear of spiritual scurvy, I suspect. Find the Rose of Ardnoch. It will lead you to the truth he hides, and perhaps the key to his freedom. Though I warn you, freedom can be a frightful thing. Rather like trying to uncork a particularly stubborn bottle of port on a full moon. Best to be prepared. Oh, and bring a good corkscrew. And possibly a priest. Or at least a very strong dram. A sharp knock interrupts the moment. Before Isobel can respond, the door creaks open. Alistair stood framed in the doorway, his silhouette cutting through the warm clutter of the room like a blade of winter air. His gaze swept over the herbs, the books, the canvases, and then landed on the journal in Isobel's hands. His eyes narrowed. These are private chambers, Alistair stated, his voice cool, clipped. My grandmother's before, your aunt's. I trust you are not disturbing anything sensitive, Lady MacLeod. He eyed the open journal with an intensity usually reserved for inspecting unstable dynamite. Isobel held the journal a little closer, a wry smile touching her lips. Sensitive, my lord? Only to those who prefer their truths watered down. I'm familiarizing myself with her belongings. She was, as you might agree, rather unique. A muscle in Alistair's jaw twitched, the Highland equivalent of a dramatic gasp. Unique, he echoed, as though the word tasted suspicious, like a particularly ill-behaved haggis. Her fascinations often led to complications. Ardnoch has had enough of those. Leave the past undisturbed. Some histories are best buried with the dead, preferably beneath several tons of peat and stone. And perhaps a few well-placed wards. And risk a severe case of spiritual scurvy, my lord? Isobel challenged playfully, recalling Morag's letter. She gestured vaguely around the room. My aunt clearly believed in a richer spiritual diet. And frankly, this place hums with stories far too loudly to be simply undisturbed. He merely glared, a faint flush rising on his prominent cheekbones. A hum, Lady MacLeod, can also be the warning of a coming storm. Or simply the wind through a poorly sealed window. He turned sharply and left, his departure as silent as his arrival. But as the door swung shut, Isobel caught it, a fleeting, unguarded glance at the bottle of dragon's breath. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Longing, perhaps. Or dread. Or maybe just a desperate need for a sturdy corkscrew. The castle groaned around her, as if shifting in its sleep. Outside, the wind rose, rattling ancient shutters and distant chains. Ardnoch was waking, and it had noticed her. Days bled into nights, and Isobel found herself swallowed whole by Ardnoch's spectral embrace. The castle no longer felt merely old, it felt awake. Its stones hummed with a low, restless energy, as though centuries of secrets were shifting beneath the mortar, stretching after a long sleep. She tried to maintain her sensible composure, but the castle had other plans. A persistent chill clung to her even in rooms warmed by a roaring peat fire. Faint whispers drifted through empty corridors, not quite voices, not quite wind, but something in between. In the vast library, a heavy leather-bound tome would fall open of its own accord, always to the same unsettling page describing ancient Highland curses. And the portrait in the main hall, a stern woman with sorrowful eyes, Lady Evelyn perhaps, seemed to follow her with a gaze that grew more accusing by the day. Worst of all were the nights. When the castle settled into its bones, she would hear it, a faint, melancholic lullaby drifting from an uninhabited wing. A tune so old it felt like memory itself. She told herself it was imagination, or the wind, or perhaps the lingering effects of Highland air that was far too bracing for city sensibilities. But the feeling of being watched, judged, only intensified. One afternoon, while sketching the decaying tapestries in the dilapidated library, she discovered it, a pressed rose, dark as dried blood, tucked between the pages of a rare book of Scottish ballads. Its petals were brittle, its stem wickedly thorned, sharp enough to draw a bead of blood when she touched it. The Rose of Ardnoch. Just as Aunt Morag had written. But it wasn't only the castle that unsettled her. It was Alistair Fraser. One moonlit night, restless and unable to sleep, she wandered into the windswept courtyard. There, silhouetted against the rugged Highland landscape, stood Alistair. His back was to her, shoulders bowed, staring out at the churning loch as though it held the answer to a question he'd been asking for years. In that moment, stripped of his laird's authority, he looked heartbreakingly human. A man carved from loneliness and duty, held together by sheer will. Isobel felt it, a tug in her chest, a dangerous mix of pity, curiosity, and something far more treacherous. She retreated quietly, but the image burned itself into her mind. She knew she would paint him like that, a solitary figure against a storm-torn world. Then came the storm. A true Highland tempest, the kind that made the very earth tremble. Rain hammered the ancient windows. Thunder rolled like a beast pacing the hills. Wind screamed through the battlements with feral delight. A section of the roof above Isobel's chambers, already weakened by age, gave up entirely. Water poured through in a dramatic cascade. She scrambled to catch the deluge with every basin and bucket she could find, her hair falling in damp curls, her dress clinging to her like a second, soggy skin. That was when Alistair appeared, a dark silhouette framed by flickering candlelight. "Well, Lady MacLeod," Alistair began, stepping into the chaotic scene, a stray drop of water splashing near his boot. His voice held a surprising flicker of wry humor, though his expression was still a masterpiece of exasperation. "It seems Ardnoch has taken a disliking to your presence. Or perhaps it expresses its displeasure rather, dramatically, with all the finesse of a drunken Highlander after a particularly potent ceilidh." He gestured vaguely at the indoor waterfall. "My apologies. I assure you, we don't usually offer en-suite water features." Isobel, struggling to position a rather large soup tureen under a particularly enthusiastic gush, looked up, a lock of damp hair plastered to her forehead. "I had noticed the distinct lack of a brochure mentioning the castle's theatrical temperament," she retorted, a breathless laugh escaping her. "Though I must admit, it's certainly more lively than Edinburgh society. And far more honest about its feelings." A corner of his mouth twitched upward, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Fleeting, but real. Indeed. Though less likely to insult your hat. He paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as it swept over her drenched form. You may take the rooms across the gallery. They are seldom used, but sound. And hopefully less prone to spontaneous indoor waterfalls. Unless, of course, you're particularly fond of aquatic adventures. I prefer my adventures to involve less spontaneous drowning. Thank you, Isobel said, managing a smile. His proximity in the cramped, leaking chamber, the warmth of his breath, the unexpected humor, sent a shiver through her. Not from cold. Something electric sparked between them. Thrilling. Terrifying. Impossible to ignore. Right, Alistair said, clearing his throat, the moment's levity abruptly receding as he remembered his lairdly duties. He gestured with his chin towards the door. Follow me, and perhaps avoid any further critiques of the plumbing to the castle itself. It appears to be rather sensitive. Isobel gathered her satchel, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. I'll endeavor to be more diplomatic with my architectural reviews, my lord. The sound of the storm fading to a distant rumble. The crackling of a hearth replaces it, along with the soft clink of glasses. The atmosphere warms, intimate and charged, as they make their way through the shadowed corridor. Isobel's new suite was grander, warmer, and mercifully free of indoor waterfalls, yet it felt no less steeped in Ardnoch's brooding history. And now, separated from Alistair by only a long, echoing gallery, she felt the spark between them grow into something far more perilous. Proximity, she discovered, was a dangerous thing. She plunged deeper into Aunt Morag's journal. The entries shifted from whimsical musings to something darker, more urgent. Morag wrote of a tragic love triangle from centuries past, involving the first Laird Alistair, a passionate woman named Evelyn, and a jealous rival whose envy curdled into malice. A forbidden love, shattered by betrayal. A forced marriage to salvage a reputation. A secret burial beneath Ardnoch's stones. And at the center of it all, the Black Stone of Ardnoch. A relic said to grant immense power but demand a terrible price, a price paid in heartbreak, generation after generation. Morag's handwriting grew jagged, frantic. The curse manifests as unfulfilled passion, a love that cannot be claimed, a desire that devours. The Black Stone cares nothing for propriety, only for hearts that beat too fiercely. And Alistair, poor boy, has become its latest feast. Though he'd never admit it. He's far too busy brooding to be properly nourished. One might almost say he suffers from a chronic case of emotional constipation. Perhaps I should have left him a laxative. Isobel snorted softly. Even in the face of ancient curses, Morag's wit endured. Despite his earlier warnings, or perhaps because of the strange pull between them, Alistair invited her to dine with him. A solitary dinner in the vast, echoing hall, lit only by towering candelabras whose flames danced like restless spirits. The candlelight softened his angular features, casting warm gold across his storm-grey eyes. For the first time, he looked less like a carved monument and more like a man. He uncorked a bottle, not dragon's breath, but a deep, ruby claret. My cellar is one thing Ardnoch keeps well, Lady MacLeod, Alistair said, his voice low, with a rare note of pride that warmed the cavernous space. This is an 1865 Bordeaux. It has character, much like some of its former inhabitants. Or, indeed, some of its current, uninvited guests. He shot her a wry glance, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He watched her taste it, his gaze intense, almost possessive. Remarkable, Isobel murmured, letting the rich liquid linger on her tongue. Complex. Defiant. It tastes rather like a secret that has been kept for far too long, finally bursting free. She met his gaze, bold and unflinching. My aunt believed wines held more than character. She believed they held truth. And perhaps a key to unlocking those stubborn Fraser hearts. He gave a dark, humorless chuckle, a sound that held more pain than mirth. Truth is a cruel mistress, Lady MacLeod. Ardnoch has had its fill of her. He paused, swirling the wine in his glass. And as for keys, some locks are best left untouched. Especially when the contents are better off gathering dust. Or when the key has been deliberately lost, Isobel countered softly, leaning forward. My aunt also believed that some secrets, like fine wines, only improve with a little careful airing. Otherwise, they turn sour. Or worse, explode dramatically, like a forgotten bottle of champagne in a hot attic. He drained his glass in one swallow, the clink echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. Some things are not meant to be aired, Lady MacLeod, he said, his voice colder now. The warmth that had briefly flickered between them receded, replaced by his usual guarded reserve. The silence that followed was thick, humming with unspoken desires and dangerous possibilities. Later that night, restless and unable to shake the weight of the castle's secrets, or Alistair's nearness, Isobel wandered into the gallery outside her rooms. She paused before an ancient tapestry depicting a horned beast wrestling with a maiden. Something about the wallpaper beside it caught her eye. A pattern, misaligned. Barely, but enough. With a painter's instinct, she peeled back a corner. Beneath the wallpaper, carved into the cold stone, were faint symbols, the same ones from Morag's journal. Ancient. Ominous. Waiting. A soft rustle behind her. A breath. Then, a sound, a sharp intake of breath, a rustle of fabric, footsteps approaching silently across thick carpet. A hand closes around her wrist, firm, not painful, but startlingly possessive. Alistair's voice, a low growl, was warm against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. Some doors, Lady MacLeod, some secrets, are best left undisturbed. His eyes, inches from hers, blazed with warning, and something far more dangerous. Possessive fury. Desperation. A plea he could not voice. His gaze dropped to her hand, still holding the peeling wallpaper, then back to the symbols beneath. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And some secrets, Isobel whispered back, her voice a little breathy, have been waiting far too long to be found. She didn't pull away, fascinated by the intense storm brewing in his eyes. The air between them tightened, electric and intimate. A dangerous dance of proximity and forbidden longing. Then, a sound, a heavy flagstone grinding aside, stone against stone, revealing a deep, echoing void beneath. The scent of damp earth rises, mingled with something metallic, and faintly, unmistakably, like ancient wine. Ardnoch had revealed a new secret. And it was waiting for them. Armed with Morag's final diary entries and clutching the withered rose of Ardnoch, Isobel knew she could no longer tiptoe around the truth that haunted both the castle and its laird. She found Alistair in the ancient chapel, a cavern of shadows and sorrow, thick with the scent of old incense and damp stone. The air felt heavy, as though centuries of whispered prayers still clung to the walls, unwilling to leave. She held up the rose. Its dark petals looked almost like dried blood, its thorny stem a silent accusation. "The rose of Ardnoch, my lord," Isobel said, her voice steady, echoing through the vaulted chamber, cutting through the oppressive quiet. "Aunt Morag wrote of it. And of Lady Evelyn. She wrote of a choice, a betrayal, and the black stone. She wrote of you, of the sorrow that shadows your soul. She believed Ardnoch isn't just your home, Alistair. It's your prison. A prison built from ancient grief and unforgiven sins. And frankly," she added, a flash of Morag's spirit igniting her eyes, "it's far too elegant a cage for such a self-imposed sentence." Her words struck like hammer blows against the facade he had so carefully constructed. Alistair reacted with a sound torn from the depths of a wounded spirit, a primal roar that reverberated through the chapel like thunder trapped in stone. He slammed his fist against a pillar, the impact echoing the tremor in his chest. Dust motes danced in the sparse light, disturbed by his fury. "You know nothing," he bellowed, his voice raw and furious, filled with centuries of bottled-up pain. "My ancestors' follies are not mine to bear. You treat ancient tragedy as if it were a parlor game. A diversion for a curious artist. This isn't some faded canvas to be rearranged at your whim, Lady MacLeod." He paced, a caged beast, running a hand through his dark hair, utterly undone. "Ardnoch demands its due. It always has." But the fury cracked, and what spilled out was far more devastating. His shoulders sagged. His breath shuddered. The weight of generations pressed down on him, crushing the last of his resistance. The Laird of Ardnoch, usually as unyielding as the granite of his castle, seemed to shrink before her eyes, becoming simply a man. When he spoke again, his voice was hoarse, stripped bare, each word a confession ripped from his soul. "Ardnoch consumes. It took Evelyn. It tried to take me. It takes everyone who dares to love here." His gaze was haunted, fixed on some unseen horror in the shadows. "It leaves you hollow, a shell of what you once were, forever fearing the next strike." And then the truth poured out, jagged, painful, unstoppable. Lady Evelyn, the first Laird Alistair's true love, had been poisoned by a jealous suitor. Her death had shattered him. Forced into a loveless marriage to preserve the lineage, he buried his heart with her. The black stone, a relic hidden deep within Ardnoch, had twisted that grief into a curse, feeding on passion, punishing love with loss. And Alistair. His own young bride had died mysteriously soon after their wedding. Whispers. Speculation. A tragedy that left him hollow, reclusive, convinced that the curse was real, and that loving him was a death sentence. He had chosen solitude as penance, as protection, as surrender. Better to be alone, he rasped, than to watch another heart break because of me. Better to live a ghost, than to be the harbinger of death. Isobel stepped toward him, her heart aching at the raw agony etched across his face. She saw the man beneath the laird, wounded, grieving, terrified of hope. "No, Alistair," she murmured, her voice soft, but fierce with a compassion that cut through his despair. "Ardnoch has not taken you. It has merely waited. Waited for someone to see past its shadows, past your solitude, and into the truth of your heart. It waited for someone brave enough to call its bluff." She held the rose out to him. Morag knew it. She sent me here not to bury the past, but to unearth it. To set it free. Their eyes locked, his filled with anguish, hers with a tenderness that dared him to believe, a stubborn fire that refused to be extinguished by his fear. For a long, breathless moment, the only sound was their ragged breathing and the ancient whispers of the chapel. He moved first. With a desperate, almost violent need, he pulled her against him. His hands tangled in her hair, gripping as though she were the only solid thing left in his world, the one vibrant color in his monochromatic existence. His lips crashed against hers, a kiss born of grief, longing, and a love too dangerous to name. It was a release, a prayer, a desperate gamble against fate. It was raw, electric, forbidden, and utterly, devastatingly right. The sound of a passionate, urgent kiss, breath-catching, a soft gasp from Isobel as she melted into him, the faint echo of their bodies colliding in the vast, hollow chapel. The withered rose, forgotten, slipped from her fingers, its dark petals scattering like fallen tears across the cold stone floor, marking the spot where a heart, long entombed, had finally dared to beat again. In the midst of their desperate, breathless embrace, Isobel's hand, still clutching the withered rose of Ardnoch, brushed against Alistair's cloak. The thorny stem pricked her finger, sharp as a whispered warning. A single drop of blood, vibrant red against the ancient grey stone, fell onto the dusty flagstone. The chapel trembled. Not violently, but with a subtle, ancient shiver, as though the castle itself had drawn a sudden, greedy breath. Beneath their feet, the floor shifted. A circular pattern, long hidden beneath centuries of dust, revealed itself like an awakening eye, etched with symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering candlelight. A beat of silence. Then the grinding rumble of stone on stone, a heavy flagstone moving, releasing a deep, echoing void. The scent of damp earth rises, tinged with something metallic, and faintly, unmistakably, like ancient wine. It was a smell that promised both forgotten treasures and lingering sorrows. Together, hands braced, breath held, eyes wide with a mixture of dread and morbid curiosity, they pushed the flagstone aside. Beneath it lay a narrow spiral staircase, its steps worn smooth by time and some forgotten traffic, descending into absolute, inky darkness. A cold draught rose from below, carrying the scent of earth, iron, and secrets too old to name, brushing against their faces like a spectral hand. "Well," Isobel whispered, her voice barely audible over the thrumming in her ears, "it seems Ardnoch is finally opening up. A bit dramatic for a secret passage, don't you think? Most castles just have a hidden lever behind a dusty book, not an architectural temper tantrum." Alistair stood at the edge, his face carved with conflict, the despair of generations replaced now by a grim, dangerous resolve. He looked into the void, and a shudder passed through him, a battle playing out in the depths of his storm-grey eyes. "This is it," he rasped, his voice rough. "The legendary passage to the Black Stone. The place where the curse began, and where it must end." He repeated the legend, barely above a whisper, as though speaking it aloud gave it power, or perhaps hope. The curse could only be broken by two souls bound by a love fierce enough to face the stone's truth. Or it would claim them both. He finally met her gaze, a profound question in his eyes. "Are you truly ready for that, Isobel? For fierce enough?" Just as they prepared to descend, Isobel remembered the final page of Morag's journal, the one she had overlooked in her haste, its message now resonating with chilling clarity. She unfolded it, the ink shimmering with new meaning in the low light. Aunt Morag's voice echoed in her mind, softer now, profound, but still edged with her dry, irreverent wit. "My dearest Isobel, if you are reading this, you have tasted the dragon's breath and found the rose. Ardnoch feeds on fear, much like a starving badger, but it can be cleansed by courage, and perhaps a good scrub with lie. Or, failing that, an exceptionally strong cup of tea and a stern talking to. The black stone is not merely a curse, it is a mirror. It reflects the deepest desires and darkest fears of those who seek it. Its greatest trick is making us believe we are alone in our shadows. Don't fall for that old theatrical stunt, darling. Misery might love company, but courage needs a partner, especially when dealing with ancient, melodramatic stones. Remember the true vintage, dear girl, not the one in the bottle, but the one in your heart. A secret shared is a burden halved, especially when it's a scandalous one. And if it turns out to be a curse that unravels your very soul, at least you'll have someone to complain to about it. Do not let Ardnoch win. Do not let fear claim your heart. Even in the darkest crypt, a fierce love can shine. Or at least, provide enough light to find the exit. Yours, with an appreciative gulp of the good stuff, Morag. A low hum begins, unsettling, resonant, vibrating through the stone, through the very bones of the castle, like a giant tuning fork struck by unseen hands, growing louder, more insistent. Isobel slipped her hand into Alistair's. His fingers closed around hers, strong, calloused, trembling ever so slightly, a tremor that mirrored her own. Their eyes met, and in that gaze lay a vow, unspoken, undeniable. A promise to face whatever lay ahead, together. The air thickened around them, charged with anticipation and dread. The hum grew louder, pulsing through the ancient bones of Ardnoch, a living heartbeat beneath the earth. They stood at the threshold, hearts entwined, fates bound, the castle watching, waiting, its ancient breath cold on their faces. Isobel, steady, fierce, her eyes burning with a resolve that mirrored the flickering candlelight. Are you ready, Alistair? To face your truth and ours? To see what lies beyond the mirrors? And perhaps, to give this old humbug of a castle a good talking to about its manners? Alistair's voice, no longer brooding, but blazing with a dangerous, exhilarating hope that chased away the shadows from his eyes. He squeezed her hand. Only if you are Isobel. Together. To the very heart of Ardnoch. And if it misbehaves, we'll teach it some new tricks. The sound of their footsteps echoing as they begin the descent, swallowed by the darkness. The hum intensifies, then cuts off abruptly with a sharp, chilling chord from the castle itself, a sound like stone screaming, before fading into utter, suffocating silence. The sound of echoing footsteps spiraling downward, the low hum swelling into a vibrating, oppressive presence. The air felt thick, alive, pressing in on them, trying to steal their breath, to steal their resolve. Hand in hand, Isobel and Alistair descended into the very marrow of Ardnoch. The spiral staircase was narrow and ancient, its slick stone worn smooth by centuries of fearful feet. With every step, the air grew colder, heavier, thick with damp earth, metallic minerals, and a strange, electric tang that prickled along their skin, raising the hairs on their arms. The sound of echoing footsteps spiraling downward, the low hum swelling into a vibrating, oppressive presence. The air felt thick, alive, pressing in on them, trying to steal their breath, to steal their resolve. Hand in hand, Isobel and Alistair descended into the very marrow of Ardnoch. The spiral staircase was narrow and ancient, its slick stone worn smooth by centuries of fearful feet. With every step, the air grew colder, heavier, thick with damp earth, metallic minerals, and a strange, electric tang that prickled along their skin, raising the hairs on their arms. The hum that had haunted the chapel now pulsed through the stone itself, a resonant vibration that seemed to pluck at their bones, making their teeth ache. It was as if the castle were breathing, waiting, and judging. Isobel tightened her grip on Alistair's hand. She felt the tremor running through him, not weakness, but the raw, visceral fear of a man walking willingly into the heart of his family's torment, facing down centuries of inherited dread. His laird's mask had fallen away completely, leaving only the man, vulnerable yet resolute. Yet even in his fear, his grip on her was fiercely protective, a silent promise of defiance. At last, the staircase opened into a vast, cavernous chamber carved deep beneath Ardnoch's foundations. The walls were rough-hewn rock, glistening with moisture, reflecting the unearthly light. And in the center, bathed in a cold, phosphorescent glow with no visible source, stood the black stone of Ardnoch. It was no jewel, no carved relic. It was a towering obsidian monolith, smooth and ancient, radiating a palpable malevolence that made the very air crackle. Its surface swirled with faint, shifting patterns, like smoke trapped beneath glass, like 1,000 tormented souls struggling for release. Isobel felt dread coil around her spine, a cold serpent tightening its grip. "The black stone," she whispered, the words thin and reedy in the oppressive silence. Alistair's strained, barely audible voice replied, laced with a familiar, weary pain. It has taken so much. It feeds on despair, on rage, on unfulfilled desire. His eyes were haunted, fixed on the swirling darkness within the stone. Every Fraser who dared to love too fiercely has been touched by its shadow. It poisoned Evelyn. It took my bride. It promises power, but delivers only sorrow. It is a gaping maw, eternally hungry. As he spoke, the swirling patterns on the stone sharpened, coalescing into vivid, tormenting images. A woman's terrified face, distorted by fear. A man collapsing, clutching his chest, his breath stolen. A pale bride in white, still as winter, her eyes forever closed. And then, Isobel saw herself. Her own fears. The quiet anxiety of a life unlived, the fleeting joy of a passion unpursued. Her own grief for a life that could have been, for loves that might never blossom. Her own terror of losing Alistair, of this fragile, desperate hope being ripped away. The black stone magnified them, twisting them into monstrous shapes. The hum grew deafening, pressing in on them, threatening to crush their resolve, to shatter their minds, to drown them in a cacophony of their deepest anxieties. It was trying to consume them whole. But then, Morag's words, clear as a bell, echoed through her mind, a beacon in the storm of psychic assault. The black stone is a mirror. It reflects your deepest fears. It makes you believe you are alone. Not a curse. A manipulation. A parasite feeding on human frailty. A cosmic bully. Isobel's voice, though she had to fight for every syllable, cut through the hum like a blade, sharp and defiant. No, Alistair. It doesn't take, it tempts. It isolates. It twists love into fear. It wants you to believe you're cursed, because a soul broken by that belief is an easier meal. She pulled him closer to the monolith, her own fears warring with a fierce protectiveness. Aunt Morag knew. It shows you your shadows to make you believe they're real, to make you surrender. But love isn't a weakness, it's the only thing it can't understand. It's the shield, the weapon, the cure. Alistair let out a desperate, broken laugh that was half sob, half hysteria. And what do you propose, Isobel? Argue with a 2,000-year-old rock? Write it a strongly worded letter? Even now, Morag's humor flickered through him, a spark of hope in his despair. Perhaps suggest it takes up a less vampiric hobby? Isobel gave him a fierce, mischievous smile, the kind that promised trouble and triumph in equal measure. Precisely. And perhaps offer it a better vintage. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the uncorked bottle of Dragon's Breath Claret, Morag's final, brilliant, liquid gift. The rich, earthy aroma of dark fruit and ancient earth cut through the metallic tang of the chamber, an unexpected fragrance of life and defiance. The sound of the cork releasing fully, the liquid pouring, thick, dark, potent, onto her hand. The hum faltered, wavered, as if startled, like a monstrous beast caught off guard. With a daring flourish, Isobel poured a trickle of the ancient wine onto the base of the black stone. The liquid hissed, a furious, offended sound, evaporating instantly as if consumed by a living entity. The cold glow around the monolith flickered violently, struggling against this unexpected intrusion. The hum dropped an octave, trembling through the chamber, a sound of profound disorientation. Isobel's voice, ringing with conviction, resonated through the cavern, amplified by the stone. Ardnoch, you old trickster. You feed on fear, but we choose joy. You foster isolation, but we choose connection. You promise power, but we choose love. Your game ends now. She cupped Alistair's face, forcing him to look at her, not the stone, not the terrifying images, but into her fierce, loving eyes. Your ancestor loved Evelyn too fiercely for this stone to understand. Your bride, Ardnoch, didn't take her, Alistair. Your fear did. Your belief in this curse let it thrive, let it spread its poison through generations. But love is not a curse. It is the shield. It is the truth. And we are choosing it. Slowly, painfully, Alistair tore his gaze from the monolith and met hers. The storm in his eyes began to clear, replaced by a dawning comprehension, a burning belief. Hope, fragile, trembling, flickered to life, catching fire. Isobel, he whispered, his voice breaking, I see it. He pulled her into a fierce embrace, kissing her, not with despair, but with defiance. With hope. With a future that was suddenly, breathtakingly possible. It was a kiss of release, of freedom, a solemn vow exchanged in the heart of the darkness. And then, a sound, a brilliant, golden eruption, light bursting from the base of the black stone, not cold and phosphorescent, but warm, vibrant, and pure. The oppressive hum shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments, like bells scattering through the chamber, fading into a gentle, shimmering silence. The light receded. The monolith darkened. The swirling pattern stilled, becoming fixed, etched like ancient hieroglyphs. The black stone was inert. Just a cold, grey rock. Its carvings now depicted vines, roses, and figures entwined, no longer torment, but release. No longer a mirror of fear, but a testament to enduring connection. Alistair, in awe, his voice thick with disbelief and wonder. It's quiet. The hum is gone. A stunned, joyous laugh escaped him, echoing in the now peaceful chamber. He looked at Isobel, his eyes shining. You spoke to a rock, Isobel. And it listened. Morag would have adored this. She would have written an ode. Isobel grinned, a brilliant, triumphant flash. Morag would have insisted on a second bottle. Possibly a third. And then probably tried to paint the monolith in neon colors. They emerged from the depths of Ardnoch hours later, not as prisoners of its past, but as its inheritors. Free, and forever changed. The castle breathed differently now. Lighter. Freer. The whispers in the walls were no longer mournful, just the settling sighs of an old house relieved of its ancient burden. A house content. Alistair Fraser was changed. The brooding laird remained, but warmth now lived in his eyes. A playful spark Isobel had only dreamed of, a ready smile that transformed his stern features. And Isobel, with her vibrant spirit and artistic vision, transformed Ardnoch. She filled its halls with color, laughter, and fine wines, always toasting Morag with a glass of dragon's breath, the wine that had broken a curse. Even Lady Evelyn's portrait seemed to smile, its sorrowful eyes now reflecting a serene peace. Their love story, born in shadow, forged in courage, sealed with a kiss and a bottle of ancient claret, became a Highland legend. A tale of passion, defiance, and an eccentric aunt who knew that sometimes the greatest truths are found at the bottom of a very good bottle, and that the fiercest love can truly set you free. Years passed, a tapestry woven with sunshine, laughter, and the occasional, entirely accidental, indoor cascade when a particularly vigorous Highland storm decided to renegotiate the castle's plumbing. Ardnoch, once a monument to sorrow, now vibrated with life. The old stone still hummed, but it was a cheerful, contented purr rather than the ominous thrum of yore. Even the ancient tapestries seemed to unfurl their scenes with less dread and more dramatic flair. Isobel, now Lady Alistair Fraser, had not abandoned her paints. Instead, Ardnoch became her muse. The castle's rugged beauty, the ever-changing loch, the wild spirit of the Highlands, and, much to his chagrin, the perpetually brooding laird himself, found their way onto her canvases. Her portraits of Alistair, however, always included a mischievous twinkle in his storm-grey eyes, a hint of the man beneath the laird that only she seemed to consistently capture. One blustery afternoon, Isobel found Alistair in the newly refurbished library, a place once prone to spontaneous literary eruptions, now merely prone to Alistair napping in a large armchair. He was attempting to read a particularly dense treatise on sheep husbandry, though by the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, it appeared the sheep were winning the battle for his attention. "My lord," Isobel announced, sweeping into the room, a trail of peat-scented wind and lavender perfume in her wake. "I've just had a rather stimulating conversation with the new vicar. He believes the strange earthy aroma now pervading the chapel is a sign of divine favor." She paused, her eyes sparkling. "Or perhaps the lingering scent of Morag's dragon's breath, which he believes has blessed the very foundations." Alistair startled awake, blinking. "The vicar. Divine favor. I trust you clarified that it was merely a stubborn stain from an overzealous attempt to exorcise an ancient curse, and not, in fact, a miracle?" He sighed, running a hand over his face. "The man still eyes me suspiciously, as if I'm personally responsible for the increase in local whiskey consumption." Isobel laughed, settling onto the arm of his chair, ruffling his hair. "He simply hasn't developed a palate for the unconventional. Much like someone else I know." She gestured to the open book on his lap. "Still wrestling with the sheep, my love? I rather thought you'd be painting them by now, or at least teaching them to dance a reel." "The sheep, Isobel, are far less complex than the intricacies of castle management," Alistair grumbled good-naturedly, pulling her closer. "And considerably less prone to charming their way into dangerous crypts." He kissed the top of her head. "Besides, my artistic talents are entirely focused on appreciating yours, and ensuring the roof remains securely attached to the building." "A practical talent, indeed," she conceded. "Though I confess, I sometimes miss the excitement of a leaking ceiling." It gave the old place character. Ardnoch has enough character to last several lifetimes. Thank you very much, he retorted. It's taken me years to convince the gargoyles to stop glaring quite so pointedly at visitors. Their gazes met, and a comfortable silence settled between them, a quiet testament to their journey. The castle, once a hungry beast, was now their home, its secrets woven into the fabric of their everyday lives. Later that evening, as the last rays of sun painted the loch in fiery hues, they stood on the battlements, a glass of dragon's breath claret in each of their hands. To Morag, Alistair said, raising his glass, a genuine, warm smile on his face. Who knew the truest way to a laird's heart was through a bottle of questionable vintage. To Morag, Isobel echoed, clinking her glass against his. Who taught us that even the most stubborn heart can be uncorked, given the right company and a healthy dose of spiritual scurvy prevention. She winked. And who would undoubtedly have advised us to always keep a spare bottle, just in case Ardnoch decides to throw another party. Alistair chuckled, a sound Isobel had come to cherish. Indeed. Though I suspect she'd also insist on a proper ceilidh in the newly renovated crypt. With bagpipes. And perhaps a few friendly ghosts. The wind, no longer mournful, whispered through the ancient stones, carrying their laughter out over the loch. It felt like an ancient castle, finally content, sighing happily in its sleep, its long story ended, its next chapter just beginning. And somewhere, in a dimension beyond peat and claret, Aunt Morag took a satisfied gulp of the good stuff, a knowing, mischievous smile playing on her lips. She always did love a happy ending, especially one with good wine and a touch of well-deserved chaos. And so the tale of Ardnoch, its shadows, its storms, its stubborn hearts, passed quietly into the royal secret flames, where stories are kept warm, tended, and remembered, long after their final page is turned. Their story became a reminder whispered across the Highlands. That courage is contagious. That joy is defiant. And that love, fierce, flawed, and gloriously human, is the strongest enchantment of all. The end.